I never thought I'd be sitting here trying to explaining how my modern parenting may have screwed up my own child. I'm Olivia, 28, and looking back on what happened to my son, Aiden. Honestly, I'm still not sure I did anything wrong, but everyone seems to think I did. It all started when Aiden was about 6 years old. My husband Henry, this total guy, who runs his family's construction business, kept trying to force all these typical boy stuff on him. You know, trucks, action figures, toy tools, all that stuff, and I couldn't stand it. Every time, Henry tried to get Aiden interested in sports or building stuff. Something in me would just flinch. So, I started doing this thing, and looking back, maybe it wasn't my finest moment. Whenever Henry's family would bring over these masculine toys for Aiden, I'd wait a few weeks, and then they would mysteriously disappear. I'd tell Henry that kids lose toys all the time, but really, they were in garbage bags in the back of my car. Before hitting the donation bin, I'd replace them with something I thought was better. Options, art supplies, stuffed animals, dress-up clothes. I had this whole group of moms who were totally supportive. You know, we would meet for coffee after the kids were off to school, and they would all compliment me on how progressive I was being. Every time I posted about letting Aiden choose his own interests on Facebook, the comments would be full of, "You are such an amazing mom," and "This is the way to raise an emotionally healthy child." Henry noticed, of course. He'd get this look on his face when Aiden would rather painting than playing catch. But he's not the type to make waves, always trying to keep the peace. He'd just get really quiet, maybe spend an extra hour in his workshop after work. I used to think he was stubborn, stuck in some outdated way of thinking about how boys should be. I started doing this thing where I'd quietly undermine him in front of Aiden. Like if Henry suggested joining Little League, I'd jump in with a poem. Or we could try art class instead, right, buddy? I'd make these little comments about how daddy just doesn't get it. Modern parenting. Looking back, that was pretty hard on both of them. The thing is, I really thought I was doing the right thing. All over my Facebook feed were these articles about toxic masculinity and letting kids express themselves. Every time I shared photos of Aiden playing dress-up or doing ballet, my friends would flood the comments with heart, emojis, and praise. Meanwhile, Henry's family would just leave them on read or make those passive-aggressive comments about kids. These days, I remember this one time when Aiden was about 7. Henry's dad brought over this giant toy workbench, a mini version of the one they use in their family business. Henry got all excited. He probably thought this would be their bonding moment. But Aiden just wasn't interested. He wanted to show his grandpa's fairy garden instead. The look on their faces. Henry's dad just kind of shut down. And Henry looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. I actually felt pretty smug about it at the time. The really messed up part, I started noticing some of the other moms in my group were pulling away when their boys had playdates with Aiden. They wouldn't say it outright, but there were more and more excuses about why their kids couldn't come over. But instead of wondering if maybe I was going too far, I'd just double down, write more about acceptance, and letting kids be themselves. Started hosting my own playgroup with the more supportive moms. That first year set everything in motion, and I had no idea what was coming. But hey, I was just trying to raise my kid right, wasn't I? Fast forward 5 years, and things really started to happen. Aiden was 11, and the differences between him and his cousin Jake became impossible to ignore. Every family gathering turned into this weird tension fest. Jake would go on about his Little League tournaments, while Aiden wanted to show his new dance routine to everyone. I kept catching these looks between Henry's family members. You know, those silent conversations that happen right over the kids' heads. Then came the night I'll never forget. I went to find Henry to tell him dinner was ready, and found him in the garage, broken, sitting on his workbench in tears, with his head in his hands. I had never seen him cry before. not even at our wedding. When I asked him what was wrong, he just looked at me with those red eyes and whispered, "What if we mess him up live?" I tried to comfort him, told him he was being dramatic, that there was nothing wrong with the way Aiden was. But inside, I was kind of angry. Like, are you really crying? Because our son chose dance over baseball. I remember posting on my mom group chat that night about toxic masculinity and how sad it was that men couldn't handle sensitive sons. The worst part was watching Henry's construction crew started treating him. These guys were like family ever since Henry took over the company. But suddenly there were these jokes about Aiden's ballet lessons. Henry was coming home quieter and quieter, spending more time alone in his shop. But instead of seeing his pain, I just got more defensive, more determined to prove everyone wrong. Around this time, Jake's mother, Henry's sister Sarah, was trying to have this heart-to-heart with me.
She went on and on about how
maybe we should encourage Aiden to try some boy activities, along with his other interests. I quickly shut that down,
wrote a whole Facebook post
about supporting your kids' authentic selves, not so subtly calling out those family members who can evolve with the times. I started noticing that Aiden was trying to act different around his dad. He would force himself to watch football or ask for tools, but his heart wasn't in it. With me, he was all about his dance, shows, and art projects. I thought that proved I was right, that he was just pretending to like boy things, to please his father. Now, I'm not so sure. The mom group started to shrink around that time. Playdate invitations became scarcer. I would see photos of birthday parties we weren't invited to, group get-togethers we weren't told about. I convinced myself that they were all just petty, that we were better off without them. Posted about choosing quality over quantity in friendships. But sometimes late at night, I would scroll through old photos from when Aiden was little, when our lives seemed simpler, when Henry looked at me with something other than quiet resignation. Something was changing, and I could feel it, but I was too stubborn, too convinced that I was right, to see where it was all leading. If I had known what was coming next, I might have done things differently. Maybe. Middle school hit like a truck. Suddenly, all these little tensions exploded into something bigger. Aiden was 13, and while he was killing it in drama club and dance, he was also coming home with mysterious bruises and torn backpacks. The school kept calling about incidents. Henry would just stand there during these meetings, jaw clenched while I talked about bullying, policies, and safe spaces. I'll never forget walking by Aiden's room one night and hearing him practicing deep voices, just repeating phrases over and over, trying to sound more like his father. When I pushed open his door, he slammed his laptop shut so fast it almost broke. Henry caught him doing push UPS in his room at 2 a.m. He once used a YouTube video about manning up, but instead of seeing it as a cry for help, I just posted on my mommy groups about internalized homophobia and toxic social pressure. The other moms had pretty much all jumped ship by then. My Facebook posts about Aiden's dance recitals or his starring role in Guason Dolls might liked too much. I watched through my phone as my sons joined soccer teams and skateboarding clubs while Aiden spent his lunch hours to avoid the cafeteria. But I kept telling myself that we were the enlightened ones, that everyone else was just behind the times. Henry started drinking more. Nothing crazy, just a beer or two every night in his workshop. Sometimes I caught him watching old videos of Aiden when he was little, back when he would at least try to play catch or help with construction projects. One night, he muttered, "I should have fought harder." I pretended not to hear him. The really messed up part, I began to notice how Aiden would completely change around his dad. He would force these conversations about sports he didn't watch or cars he didn't care about. With Henry's family, he would try to walk differently, talk differently, like he was playing a role. Then with me, he'd relax back into his normal self, or what I thought was his normal self. I encouraged this. I told him he didn't have to pretend for anyone. Now I wonder if I was the one who made him pretend. Things came to pass. At his cousin Jake's birthday party, all the boys were playing a rough game in the yard, and Aiden was trying so hard to keep up. He got knocked down hard and started crying. Before Henry could even move, I was there making a scene about toxic masculinity and dangerous play. I practically dragged Aiden out of there. Post about toxic family dynamics. All the way home. Henry didn't speak to me for 3 days after that. Looking back, I can see how. Everything was building up to what happened next. All the signs were there. Aiden's struggles, Henry's silence, my own stubborn denial. But when it finally happened, none of us were ready. Not really. It was during the spring musical. Aiden was playing Angel in Rent. Yeah, I know. Pretty bold choice for a high school production.
He was 14.
The show had just ended. And instead of coming straight to us after the curtain call, he stayed on stage. My stomach sank before he even opened his mouth. He came out, right in front of everyone, still in his costume and stage makeup. The auditorium went silent, like you could hear the air conditioning humming quietly. I immediately started clapping, trying to get others to join in, ready to be the supportive mother. I had always branded myself as such. But then I looked up. God, I'll never forget his face. He just got up and walked out. Didn't say a word. Just walked away. Henry didn't speak for 2 days after that. He called in sick to work, spent hours in a shop. I kept trying to get him to talk. Posted about supporting our children in there. Truth on Facebook. But he just
shut down.
Then on the 3rd day, I found him sitting in his truck in the driveway. He was crying so hard that the whole vehicle was shaking. When I opened the door, he looked at me with these I had never seen before. I should have been a stronger father,
he said.
I let you. But he couldn't finish the sentence. He just put his head on the wheel and collapsed. Again, I stood there, wanting to be angry at what he was implying.
But something stopped me.
Maybe it was seeing this man, who could lift steel beams and run an entire construction company, just crumbled. That's when the whisper started. Not just from Henry's family, I expected, but from my own circle as well. My mom group chat got real. Silence whenever I posted about Aiden.
Comments like,
well, you always did that. Let him express himself started popping up. People who'd praised my modern parenting suddenly had opinions about influence and guidance. I found Aiden's journal by accident while doing laundry. I know I shouldn't have read it, but there were entries going back months. Stuff about trying to be what everybody wanted. Lines like, Mom gets so happy when I'm feminine, and Dad looks so sad when I can't be normal. Reading those words felt like someone had taken the wind out of my sails. Henry tried to talk to me about it one night. Started saying maybe we should have found a balance. Gave Aiden more room to figure things out for himself, instead of pushing him one way or the other. I quickly shut that down and accused him of being unsupportive. But later that night, I found myself scrolling through old photos, seeing all the times when maybe, just maybe I'd been the one doing the pushing. The school counselor suggested family therapy. Henry immediately agreed, which surprised me. But sitting in that office, watching Aiden try to explain how he felt torn between what I wanted and what his father wanted, that's when it really hit me. Maybe we'd both failed him, just in different ways. Not that I would admit it out loud.
Not then anyway.
The next year was like walking on eggshells. Aiden threw himself into theater. And yes, he was really good at it. I posted about his performances and tried to keep up the proud, supportive mom image. But something felt different. The likes and comments now felt hollow. Even my closest friends started dropping these little hints about how maybe I'd helped Aiden find this path. As if I had somehow made that happen. Henry's brother, Mike, came over one weekend to help with some repairs around the house. I heard them in the garage. Henry was just breaking down about everything. About feeling like he'd let his son down. About watching other dads play rough with their boys, while he'd stepped back, afraid to push too hard. Mike kept saying it wasn't his fault, But Henry just kept repeating, I should have stood up to them more.
Meanwhile,
My own support system was falling apart. My mom group was basically disbanding. Everyone was. Suddenly, they were too busy with their own kids' activities. The last straw was when Lisa, my supposed best friend, suggested that perhaps my progressive parenting had confused Aiden. I blocked her number that night, but her words continued to echo in my head. I began to notice things I'd been blind to before, like how Aiden would light up when Henry made an effort to connect with him, even when it was awkward, or how he'd sometimes watch his cousin, Jake, work on cars with his dad. With that look, I couldn't quite read, but every time those thoughts crept in, I'd push them away, post another message from a supportive mom, share another article on gender expression, anything to drown out the doubt. The worst part were the family dinners. Every Sunday at Henry's parents' house, watching his dad, that tough old construction worker, trying to connect with Aiden. He'd ask about the theater in that strained voice, as if he were speaking a foreign language. Aiden would try so hard to engage, to find common ground, but there was this gulf between them that seemed to widen every week, and somehow, in everyone's eyes, it felt like that rift was my fault. I caught Aiden one night, scrolling through old family photos on his phone. He was looking at pictures from when he was little, when things were simpler. When he saw me watching, he quickly switched to Instagram, but not before I saw the tears in his eyes. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything was okay, but the words got stuck in my throat. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I was the right person to offer comfort. Henry and I hardly touched each other anymore. We had become like roommates who happened to share a child. He'd spend more time at work. I lost myself in online support groups. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with that look.
not angry, just tired.
Like he'd given up trying to bridge the gap between us. And the thing that scared me the most, I was beginning to understand why. Then something happened that no one saw coming. Aiden turned 16.
And, out of nowhere,
He asked Henry if he could start learning about the family, business. I remember Henry's face, as if someone had just given him back something he thought he'd lost forever. At first, I thought Aiden was just trying to make his dad feel better, but it wasn't like that at all. Turns out our son, the boy I thought I knew better than anyone, actually loved working with his hands. He spent afternoons at the construction site with Henry. Come home covered in dust, but grinning from ear to ear. He'd talk about load-bearing walls and proper foundation techniques. With that excitement, I used to only see him when he was talking about theater. And the thing is, he was still doing theater, still wearing what he wanted, still being completely himself, more of himself than I ever let him be. Henry changed too, started standing taller, smiling more. They developed these inside jokes that I didn't get, this shorthand way of talking about work that left me on the outside looking in. They'd come home and talk about some problem they solved together, and I'd be watching them from the kitchen. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Last week I overheard them in the garage. Aiden was asking Henry about taking over the business. Someday, maybe. Studying construction management in college. Henry's voice was thick with emotion as he said, "Son, I never thought." He couldn't even finish the sentence. And Aiden just said, "I know, Dad, I get it now." The real kick in the teeth. Aiden sat me down, told me yesterday that he appreciated everything I have done to support him being gay.
But he said,
Sometimes it felt like that was all I wanted him to be.
"Mom," he said,
"You were so busy making sure I could be everything that you didn't let me just
be."
I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. So here I am, watching my son grow into this amazing person. This perfect blend of sensitive and strong, artistic and practical. Watching him develop a relationship with his father that I spent years quietly undermining. Watching Henry beam with pride, not just when Aiden nails a play, but when he masters a new skill at work or solves a construction problem. And I'm just
here,
still posting supportive mom stuff on Facebook, still telling myself I did the right thing. But late at night, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder if maybe I was the one who tried to put our son in a box. Just a different box than the one I accused Henry of creating.
They're out there right now.
Working together on Henry's truck. Aiden, still wearing his drama camp t-shirt, covered in grease, laughing at something his dad said. And I'm inside, writing this, trying to convince myself and everyone else that I haven't spent years pushing my own agenda on my kid. But you know what? Maybe I did. Maybe I really did.